Welcome back to the next phase of restoring this old 1966 Boston Whaler 13. I've got the delamination taken care of. The next step's going to be to patch up a big old hole that we have in the anchor locker. Let me show you what that looks like. So here's the anchor locker. You can see this big hole here. Apparently in the early years, this is a 66 Boston Whaler, didn't do a great job of putting a lot of fiberglass in there. What I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to solder blast all this loose paint out of here before I do anything else. Cut loose all this bad fiberglass or weak fiberglass. Fill this up with foam, you know, the kind that you would spray into crevices or whatever for insulation. Shape it and then put glass over it. One of the things I've done is when I was doing the delamination, I did have leftover fiberglass, so whatever was left over I poured in here. It's given it a good solid base. Hopefully that will help with any future anchor bouncing problems, if you will. So the foam's had 24 hours, it's dried overnight, so it's cured, it's ready to cut. And it's made quite a big pile of stuff. I'll show you what I mean, but I'm going to cut it loose basically. And then I'm going to sand it to shape. So yeah, it's expanded quite a bit. Alright, so what I've got is a couple of different layers of fiberglass. I've got this woven mat, which is going to use that as an underlayment. The 1.5 inch stranded, excuse me, 1.5 ounce stranded. Then I've got a 0.39 ounce stranded. And the idea is to layer this up, each layer a little bit wider than the first. So I've measured what I need to cut. And the first layer that we put in there is going to be the the underlayment, the woven. But I know I need 7 3/4 inch wide, so I'm going to mark it at about an inch. No, 7 3/4. I'm just going to put a couple of marks in here. What I'm doing here as I cut these pieces is laying them down in reverse order. So the smaller pieces will go towards the bottom, larger pieces towards the top. Once I'm done cutting all the pieces, I'll flip that pile upside down. The smaller piece will be on top, and that will be in the correct order to lay down when I start adding the fiberglass pieces into the hole that I'm covering.
There you go.
Before I do any glass work, I want to wipe this down and with acetone, make sure there's clean surface. And I already blew it out. Acetone does funny things to that foam. Turns it yellow apparently, but it's okay. So I'm just making sure there's no oils or anything to get this. I put a little plug in here. I cut a piece of that 5/8 hose and just put it in there. That way I won't have to bore it out. I'll probably end up reshaping it after all the glass is done. But for right now, we're ready to go. So let me go ahead and get a epoxy resin mix ready, and we'll start laying these sheets in here. So here's the epoxy resin I'll be using. Actually, it's pretty neat. It's easy to use. 1 pump of the resin to 1 pump of the hardener. I'll be using 3 pumps of each. I think that'll give me enough to get the all the glass work done. I bought out a jar of acetone, kind of dirty, but I'll use that for cleanup, get rid of all the excess stuff, and I'll be mixing this stuff in this little container here. So let me go ahead and get it mixed up, and we'll start laying down that fiberglass. Alright, so I've got this resin nice and mixed up. What I'm going to do is brush this on, get a nice thick coat to start with. Now there's a lot of gaps in this foam, I don't know if you can see that or not, and that's okay. It's just there to give a basis or a foundation to the glass work that'll be laid up underneath of it. So getting this brushed on there. As soon as I get this done, we'll get the first layer on. And here goes the first layer. Try to work it underneath the that hose there, and we're going to roll that in. Try to get this first layer right, because everything else is going to follow it. And of course, I'm going to have to get some on my fingers probably. So let me brush on some resin onto this. I want to make sure it's saturated. Yeah, if you don't get this first layer on right, everything else is gonna be crap. It's got more or less the shape I want it. Let's get that rolled in. I want it to be nice and flat. Now let's go for the second layer. So if you look on the right hand side, the sheets of fiberglass that I cut earlier are there, and they're in the right order to go on. So basically the largest pieces are on the bottom, smallest pieces are on the top, and as you pull them off you can lay them down, they'll come off in the right order. fiberglass is set up really nice. That epoxy resin worked really great. And now comes the fun part. We're going to get some sanding done. So I'm going to sand this down, grind out the opening down here where the water will drain out, just to kind of channel everything in there. But I'm really pleased with the way this has come out so far. So I'm going to get going with the sanding. I hope you've enjoyed watching getting that hole patched up with fiberglass. The next steps are going to be fairing compound, but before I do that, I'm going to do a segment on patching up all these little holes. There's a ton of little holes in the boat. Some of them are probably reused, but the ones that were patched